We are going to go ahead and begin. Again, Ellie Backman here from Chabad in College Park. Thank you for joining. Again, the text can be found at rambamgw.com under resources or a number of other sites, or you can Chayenu, etc. Today we are on Monday, and we're on Chapter 2 of the Hilchot Kriyat Shema, the laws of reciting the Shema. So in Chapter 2, the Rambam is going to spend some time in a little bit more of the detail of when and rather how to read the Shema. The details that go into the actual reading of it, situational readings, word readings, and things of that type. Let's begin. Parak Sheni, Chapter 2. Hakara es Shema, v'lo kivan libo b'pasik rishon, shehu Shema Yisrael. If somebody recites the beginning of the Shema and did not have intention to fulfill A, the mitzvah, but B, to understand the intention of what he's reading, when he reads the first verse, which is Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. When you read that, a person needs to have A, intention fulfilling the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, and B, intention of understanding that he's accepting upon himself the kingship of God and the unity of God, Hashem Echad, and God is one, which are chapters and volumes written about. And all of this has to be in its intention. Lo yatsa, if you did not have all this intention, you have not fulfilled Yidei Chavasa, your obligation. Hashar, and for the rest of the Shema, all the other verses and paragraphs that come afterwards, im lo kivan yatsa, if you did not have all this proper intention, you have fulfilled your commandment. So in other words, ideally a person should always concentrate on what he's saying and have the intentions behind it. But halacha, the Rambam says, understands that it's very difficult for a person to hold their attention and concentration that long. So therefore, the first pasuk gets an absolute necessity, and without it, you've not done your obligation. But the rest, you will still have fulfilled your obligation just by reading it. And the Rambam continues, if somebody was reading the book of Devarim of Deuteronomy, and he comes across the verses of Shema, or if he was a scribe, a sofer, writing the books, the Torah, and writing the verses of the Shema, Ba'avodas Kriya, during these time that you're supposed to read the Shema, so it's early in the morning, and he wakes up in the morning, and he goes ahead and starts doing his job as a sofer, and he comes to the verse, Shema Yisrael, and he keeps writing it or checking it with thinking about what he's doing, Yatsa, he has fulfilled his obligation. But the Rambam emphasizes, who this is, of course, Shekiva Liba Pasik Rishon, that by the reading the first pasuk of Shema, either reading it in Chumash or checking it in the Torah, he stopped and had the intention to fulfill his obligation and the intention to, as we said before, of the unity of God, the kingship of God, etc. Paragraph 2. Base. Kol Adam Kara Kedarka, a person may recite to Shema however he is, which means Bein Omdin, whether he's standing, Bein Mahalchin, whether he is walking, Bein Shachvin, whether he's lying down, Bein Rochvin Agabai Behema, whether he is sitting on an animal and riding on the back of an animal. The Rambam does continue, but you should not read Kriya Shema with your face flat on the ground, or lying flat on your back. In other words, flat down or flat up. The Rambam says you should not read Shema, because as the commentaries say in the Gemara, that these positions are improper. They sort of don't show the proper respect for Hashem, for God, as you're reading the Shema. But you can read it when you're lying on your side. So again, not flat up, not flat down, but lying on your side, you can read the Kriya Shema. Not just you can, there are certain times you will. The Rambam continues, if someone is extremely obese and very heavy, and he cannot get up on his side, or somebody who is, God forbid, ill in the bed, and he's not able to get up, so you should just get up a little bit, show some respect, getting someone up on his side, and then he should read the Shema. But try not to remain completely flat either direction. ideally completely on the side, or at least somewhat on the side. 3.
Right.
Yes?
Yeah. Rabbi,
Yes.
why did Maimonides come up with the fact that lying on your side is not disrespectful?
It's a quote from the Gemara. Rashi in the Gemara Brachos explains that the completely up or completely down is sort of a haughty expression and not respectful, but the side shows less of that. In other words, you're going to do it at some point while you're in bed, possibly. So the Rambam's saying of the positions on the side is the least haughty and is the most sort of bending towards something in a respectful way.
All right, Rabbi.
Paragraph 3, the person was walking. You're taking a walk in the morning, and you suddenly realize that you did not read the Shema. Maybe you should stand still, and read the first pasuk. Because again, the first pasuk demands that intention and that concentration. Stop walking, read the first pasuk. And afterwards, he can keep walking and read the rest. And say the rest, in other words, in his mind or in his mouth, not mind, in his mouth, and read if he needs while he's walking. Haya Yashan, if a person was sleeping, Mitzari Noso, Meiri Noso, you have to disturb him and wake him up. Achiyikra Pasik Rishon. So there's a time that we're going to learn about until which you can read Shema in the morning. And a person's sleeping in late that day, and you walk into his room, you have to disturb him and wake him up until at least he reads the first pasuk. After that, you do not have to disturb him. The commentary is saying an interesting thing. I don't want to run off on a longer conversation, but the difference in the terms disturb versus awake means that the first pasuk you must make sure the person is completely awake, fluid, and understanding to have the concentration of what he's saying. The rest, even if he's half asleep, but he says it, you don't have to disturb him. That's how many read into the Rambam right here. But the Rambam seems to say to make sure that the first pasuk is awake. 4. Misha haya osik b'malacha, the person was in the middle of his work. Here the Rambam says you should stop your work until you recite the entire first section, not first pasuk, not verse, but the first paragraph. And so too ha'umnin b'teilin b'malachta b'parsha rishona. Umdin are workers, but of a fighter, maybe like an artisan of some sort. They also should stop their work for the first parsha, the first paragraph. That their reading of the beginning part of it should not be arai. Arai is kind of like a haphazard, disrespectful, in the middle of knocking the nail or painting the thing. I'm saying, but no, stop what you're doing. And here the Rambam says you should do the whole first parsha, the whole first paragraph. V'hasharkar kedarka, and after that, the rest, the other 2 paragraphs, you can read regularly. V'osik b'malachta, while you're doing your work. Now, clearly, this is a person who can't stop the work. Maybe he's working for someone else, and he doesn't feel it's right to take off the time. Obviously, if you're in a position where you can stop for all 3, that's ideal. And even if you're high up on top of a tree or on top of a wall, you're doing some kind of work up top. So what should you do? You can read in wherever you are. And you recite the brachot, the special blessings we're going to read more about in a moment, before and afterwards, even though you're up on the ladder, or you're up on the tree, up on the wall. 5. If a person was learning, he was sitting in yeshiva and he was studying, wherever he was studying. And it comes the time for Kriya Shema, posek v'kara. He has to stop his learning and read the Shema. And he should go ahead and say the brachot, the blessings we're going to talk about before the Shema and after the Shema. If you were doing communal activities, then you don't need to stop. And you should finish what you're doing. And then, when you finish your communal activities, there's enough time before the end of the time to read Shema, then you should read the Shema. And the interesting thing is, it says in the pasuk, "V'lech techa b'derech," when you walk on your way, which implies your way, but not communal way, not a community offering. There's a number of halachot over time, which we will see that when a person is doing communal activities, we've given them certain leniencies. We've learned about perhaps the way you dress already, and and here the Rambam is saying because there's a certain leniency, because you're accomplishing for everyone, we don't demand that you stop what you're doing, and hopefully you'll finish with enough time to say the Shema. 6. If a person was eating, he was in a bathhouse. In the olden days, you had to go to the bathhouse. It was a big deal. So you were having a haircut. So you were working in a tannery with skins of an animal, and you're doing what they do to make them proper for a parchment and for hides. Or if you were a judge in a bezdin, sitting in a court case. You're a judge in a court case, and the case is continuing. Goimer v'achar kach krishma. Finish what you're doing, and then you read Krishma. But if you were scared, Shema yaver zaman kriya, that maybe if I continue what I'm doing, I got carried away, and I will miss the proper time to read the Shema. So what you do, pasak v'kara, and therefore I stopped. I said, hold the case, hold the tannery, hold everything for a minute. And he read the Shema, that is the best ideal way to do it. So ideally, you should try to stop and make sure, but technically, because you're kind of involved, and you can continue what you're doing first. 7. Mishiyara Litva, a person goes down to go to the mikvah, to immerse himself in a mikvah, in a ritual mikvah, bath. Im yachal la'alos lis kasos v'likrais, if he's able to go down, go in, come out, wrap himself up, cover himself, and to read Kodem Shetane Tachama before sunrise, Yalavi is Kasav Yikra. He should come up and he should cover himself, and then he should read the Shema. But then maybe he's going to miss the opportunity of reading the Shema in the ideal time, which we learned earlier in chapter 1, Neitachama, the beginning of sunrise, is the ideal time. And this person said, if I'm in the mikvah, I'm going to miss that opportunity. What should you do? You should sort of cover yourself in the water, and you should read the Shema. But hold on, the Rambam is going to give us some more details. If the water has a bad smell, in the olden days, that obviously was not the plumbing that we have today, water would sometimes retain stale, stagnant water would have a smell. Or maybe it was outside a river or a lake, which sometimes could have, for natural reasons, not a good smell. So that water you can read the Shema in, because that's not a fitting place. Or water that was used to soak. The commentary, soak means soaking things like flax. So it already becomes a smelly or thick kind of heavy water. But not absolutely clear, transparent water. In those cases, you cannot read the Shema. Why not clear water? Clear water should be the best, ideally. The answer is no, because your body, your nakedness can be seen, and that's disrespectful. So now, if I can't do it in clear water, and I can't do it in smelly water, and I can't do it in soapy water, what should I do it in? If it's murky and dark and somewhat dirty water, that doesn't smell, so it just has a bit of a heavier look, but not a heavier smell, in that place, you can go ahead and read Shema. So the Rambam is saying, go to the mikvah, and you realize you're about to lose time. You can read the Shema underwater as long as the water covers you and doesn't smell. Now, many of us are not in those circumstances today based on the water we deal with and the timing, but the Rambam's going through a number of halachas from the Gemara. Ches, paragraph 8. Akar Krishma, now when somebody is reciting Krishmas, now you're actually reading it. You should not gesture or wink your eyes, or your lips, kind of make some motions with your lips. Point to people, go things with your fingers. in order that your reading does not become disrespectful or kind of trivial or haphazard. In other words, if I'm in the middle of reading and I start winking to you and trying to say, "Oh, no, 1 minute, 1 second, give me a second," or whatever, you make a hand motion, that shows that the more important thing is the person you're interacting with, not your Shema. That's disrespectful. V'im also came, but if you did that, you winked at someone, you contacted someone, you made a hand motion to someone, technically you read the Shema, you fulfilled your obligation, but Meguna, that's really not nice, it's improper. V'sarich, now the Rambam continues another halacha. You have to lashmiya la'ozdoi k'shikara. You need to hear the words when you're reading them. It's not mind reading here, it's actual pronunciation of the words. If you did not hear it, you're also fulfilling. In other words, if I'm mouthing the words but not that loud, I fulfilled it. But if I'm not mouthing words completely, I haven't fulfilled it. Ideally, I should mouth it so loud that I can hear it actually. And you have to be very particular about the letters to pronounce them and enunciate the letters properly. But as long as you recited them properly, if you weren't so clear, you still fulfilled your obligation. What does that mean? Test, the next paragraph, the Rambam is going to explain to us some of the halachos of pronouncing the words, and these are brought down in many siddurim right before the Shema in the morning, or in halacha of words we should pay attention to. And he goes the following. Yishmrish lo yirapes hachazak v'lo yachzik es harafa. You should make sure that certain marks, certain words, certain letters, vowels have an emphasis, and certain ones don't. A dagesh is like a dot in it that gives it a strong emphasis. And a rafa is a weaker one without that dot, without that oomph to it. Therefore, v'lo yaniach hanad v'lo yanad hanach. And you shouldn't do it. Like, for example, a dagesh would be, before we go to the next line, a dagesh would be a bet versus a vet. We know aleph, bet, vet, or aleph, beis, vez, depending on how you pronounce it, right? So the beis and the vez, the bet and the vet look the same. The difference is one has a dot and one doesn't have a dot, right? So I can't read v'dibarta, the word that says in Shema is v'dibarta bum. I can't say, I'll take out the dot and read v'dibarta vom. That's not good. And the same thing in v'dibarta, or another one that has b'chol levavecha is a vet. I can't say b'chol lebabecha. I can't add a dot. That's not good. And then the Rambam continues also, v'lo yaniach hanad v'lo yanad hanach. In the shva sound, the shva is the vowel that has two dots, one on top of each other under a letter. There's two ways to pronounce it. One begins a syllable and one ends a syllable. One has a sound to it and one we don't really pronounce the sound. So you could have b'chol levavecha, le is a shva that's being pronounced. Or you can have where it ends the syllable. So you live. So you have to make sure that when you're reading the shva, you're reading the proper, either making the sound beginning syllable, or it's the end of the syllable and it kind of doesn't have the shva sound, it's just the sound of the letter. Lefichach, and therefore the Rambam continues another idea. That you should put a pause between two words. Which two words? Kol ben kol shtei oisius adoimis she'achas ben seif teva v'acheres tchilas teva smuchala. Anytime you have two letters, one ends the word before the first word, and the same letter starts the second word. You need to make a break. You shouldn't slur that sound into one. For example, the Rambam tells you, keep going, for example, b'chol levavacha. There's a lamed that ends the first word and a lamed that begins the second word. So Korah, you should read b'chol, read the word b'chol, v'shohen, stop, v'chozen, then continue, v'korah levavacha. But if you read them together, v'chol levavacha, you don't know if there's one lamed, two lameds, what's going on there, that's not proper. V'chen, he continues another example. V'avadetem mehera. V'avadetem mehera makes it all one long word. That's not right. V'avadetem mehera. Take a break. V'kenaf psil. And another one in the third paragraph. V'sarich levayer zayin. And then the Rambam continues another idea in You have to say the Zion of Taskiru, right? Of Tiskuru. I'm sorry. Well, I read the word wrong myself here. That when you say Tiskuru, Laman Tiskuru, Tiskuru is a Zion, means to remember. That helps us remember all the mitzvahs. If you said it was a sin, Laman Tiskuru, the word would be reward, schar. So it would be like completely different words. And Rambam says, make sure you get a Zion in there. And sometimes you'll hear people reading Shema that they will kind of elongate and overpronounce that Zion. Well, that's what you have to do, and not the Rambam doesn't say, but make sure you make it a Zion and not a sin along the way. Okay? Now the Rambam continues something which is not so much about pronunciation, but more kind of in a concept. V'sarich laharich b'dalet shel echad. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem echad. The Rambam says that dalet of echad should be drawn out. Why? Because we're thinking that Hashem is the king above us in one. Echad is Aleph is one because of the numerical value. Chet is the 7 heavens and the 1 earth. The numerical value of Chet is 8. So there's one God, 7 heavens and 1 earth. And where in this world, Uva Arba Ruchot, as the Rambam continues, that the king is over heaven, earth, and the 4 corners, the 4 sides of the world, all 4 directions. So by spreading out the Dalet, we're emphasizing how God is everywhere, number 1. Number 2, there's something you want to make sure you don't make it like a resh, because that would be God, Elokim Achirim, a God, another God, God forbid, Dalet, in a resh could look. So you want to make sure you're emphasizing it's a Dalet. But Shulchan Aruch, there are different opinions of how to do this. Some actually, you'll hear the chad and make the dalet sound long. Some will stop the dalet after chad and then in their mind continue to sound. Because you run a risk, if I start elongating the actual dalet, it has no vowel under it. It's the end of the word. But it's very hard to keep a sound without some vowels. Echad, I put a shva. Echad, I put a patach. That's a different word. That's not echad. So, according to the Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch, he says, stay the word with a stop, and in mind continue the thought. Others actually elongate the sound along the way. V'sarich shelo yachtav b'chet, and the chet, the Rambam says, also don't make it too quick. Kidei shelo yeh omer ichad. So echad, if you go ichad, if you kind of break up the word that way, I in Aramaic means no, chad in Aramaic means one. What you could come out saying is no one, that God is not one. And that would be actually exactly the opposite of what the meaning of Echad means. So again, the Rambam is highlighting words and vowels and ideas for us to understand that you pronounce them properly allows you to make sure you get the proper meaning, intention of the word as you go through it. Now the Rambam changes topic to a different concept. 10. That you're allowed to recite the Shema in any language that you understand. But whoever reads them in any other language, let's say English, you should read them. You have to pronounce whatever words you're saying properly in that language as well. And you need to be as particular in that language as you are in English. And just to give you an example, there's a debate amongst many how to translate when you say God's name. Many of us will hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And there are many who will argue that in English, the word Lord doesn't exclusively mean God. So therefore, perhaps you really should say, Hear Israel, God is God, our God is one, and never use the word Lord because it might not have the same connotation. It's not necessarily an accepted opinion, but just sharing with you an idea of how even in English, in the translations, should be as real and as close as possible to the part. Now, while halacha allows us to do certain davening in English, ideally we should do it in Hebrew because Lashon HaKodesh is not just a language, it's a holy tongue. And has all of these intentions, ideas, numerical values, depths, layer upon layer, is only found in Lashon HaKodesh. It's not going to be found in any other language. So ideally, we should learn it read it in the proper language, in the holy language of Lashon HaKodesh. But while a person's learning, they may be able to do some in English, but again, be as real and true as possible. 11. If somebody reads the Shema out of order, he has not fulfilled his obligation. What are we referencing? What does it mean out of order? That in the paragraph has, let's say, 10 psukim, and you read number 1, 2, then 6, 7, then 3, 4, and it's not that you're not allowed to do. I will hate parsha la parsha, but if you read by accident or for some reason the second paragraph before the first paragraph, it's really not supposed to do. It's an improper way of doing it. But Ani Omer, the Rambam says, I say, Shiyata, you have fulfilled your obligation. Why? Because they're not sequential. They're not right after each other in the Torah. So therefore, the Torah doesn't put them in a particular order. Therefore, you can also not keep the same order. Ideally, you should, because there's a lot of depths as we've learned before. We'll continue learning. The first one is accepting general kingship. The second one is accepting the mitzvah. The third one is remembering leaving Egypt. So there's an order to how it goes. But technically, the Rambam said if you did it out of order by paragraph, not by verse, you still fulfill. Kara pasik, v'chazav v'kara pam shliya reis. If a person read a verse and then reads it the second time, that's improper. Kara mila achas u'kfeila. If you read one word and then repeated that word, kigon shikara shema shema mishtaki ma'aseh. If you read shema shema, we quiet you, we silence you. The Mishnah in Bracha talks about it and said that it may have been a sign of heresy, that I feel like I need to call God twice, shema shema, to God, so to say. And so particularly in that example, that actually the Mishnah talks about whether if someone does that as leading the community, whether you have to remove him from leading the community, etc. If a person clearly has a natural stutter or some reason why they sometimes repeat a word, that's not what we're talking about as much here. But ideally, you should try as best as you can not to repeat words and for sure not to repeat verses. 12. Karis Rugin, if you read it intermittently with stops, you fulfilled your obligation, which means I read a little bit and I stop. I read a little bit more and I stop. But even if I waited, the wait time, the duration of the wait time was as long as it was necessary to finish the entire reading, yatsa, I fulfill my obligation. So I'll say then again, this refers to someone who's reading it in order. Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad, he stops. A minute later, he says, Baruch Shem Kivon Malchus, he stops. Doesn't matter how long the duration of the stops are, if you continue in order, you fulfilled your obligation. Kara misnam name, if a person says it while he's drowsing, right? That means he's not fully awake, but he's not fully asleep yet. He's kind of in between, not here nor there type, half asleep kind of thing. You fulfilled your obligation. Like we said earlier, as long as you have to be awake by the first passage. The first passage, you have to be awake for that intention. And as mentioned before, this is why a lot of people understand that Rambam before to say you have to keep on waking him to make sure he's awake for the first passage, him or her. But the later part, they can just go ahead and continue in this half awake, half asleep and say their words. 13. Safik Kara Kriyat Shema, Safik like Kara. If someone has a doubt whether they read Krishma or a doubt whether they did not read Krishma, Chosev Kara, they can go ahead and repeat, say it again. It's a mitzvah min Torah. A mitzvah from the Torah, when we have a doubt, if we've done it, we should do it again. And you can even do the brachas before and afterwards. Again, Aval im yada shekara, but if you know you read it, when stoppingly berach lafanel or lachareha or lo berach, but I don't remember that I read the brachot in the morning Shema or the brachot in the night Shema before and after. I know I said the Shema. I'm convinced and completely convinced I said the Shema. I don't remember the brachot. Then do not repeat the brachot. Brachot are not the same mitzvah of the Torah, therefore we don't repeat them. Plus, we have the concept of suffix brachot la'akel, that whenever we have a doubt of a bracha, we go for the leniency. We don't want to recite God's name in vain for no reason, so we don't say it. Kara v'tov, a person reads and made a mistake. So what should he do? Yachzor l'makom shetar, go back to the place he made a mistake, and then we continue reading. Nela mimenu ben parsha l'parsha ben yodea ezer parsha hishlim ve'ezer tzarich la'haskil. He was in the middle of reading it. He finished the paragraph, but he can't remember if he finished the first paragraph or the second paragraph. What should he do? So Chosel Paisha Rishona Shiva Haftal Shem Mokecha. The Rambam says, go back to the first paragraph and read it again. And if you have to, you read over the one paragraph because we're in a doubt here. We don't know what you did. Tal be'emsa parak. If I made a mistake in the middle of the paragraph, middle of the chapter, ve'ini yodea, and I don't know, eza parsha hishlim, which chapter I have completed. Ve'ez is, I'm sorry, I skipped the line here. Tal be'emsa parak, ve'ini yodea lehechem pasuk, and I don't know where I stopped. Chozel l'rosh parak, go back to the beginning. So I'm in the middle of reading a paragraph, a chapter, and I get stuck, and I can't remember. Go back to the beginning of that chapter. If you're reading the word uchesaftam, that word is said both in the first paragraph and the second paragraph. Should go back to the first paragraph. In other words, you always want to make sure you said Shema. If you're in doubt, go back to the place where the doubt begins and continue it again, so you'll make sure you've covered your tracks. You covered everything it said the entire Shema. Now the last verse of the second chapter, is different than the ending of the first paragraph. So the Rambam says, I don't know if I said Chsaftam from the first one or Chsaftam from the second one, but I do know, I read the last line of the second one, in the Chosa, then you don't have to go back. Who consider that you know it by heart, you're just saying it, and if you've already finished the second chapter, paragraph, that shows us that that's really where you're up to. So you don't have to go back anymore. 15, Tezvav. The Rambam now will tell you what happens if you interact with people in the middle of Shema. What should you do? You're sitting there saying Shema, and suddenly somebody walks by. Say hello, don't say hello, they say hello to you. So the Rambam will give a bunch of details. I'm going to go through that in the next few, till the end of the chapter. He was reading Shema and he interacted, bumped into, and he encountered another person. Somebody walks over to him. It's Imaya ben Perik LaPerik, if he was between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Posek, Umaschil, Vishal Shalom. You could stop and you could say, how are you? To who? To Mishu Chai B'Kvodo, to a person who you are obligated from the Torah to give respect to. Say, Kigon the Rambam says, Kigon Shapaga Ba'avin La Rabbo, Umishugadol Meru B'Chachma. Your father, your teacher, a great leader, a great teacher walks over to you, and you finish the first paragraph, stop, and say, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? To this person, because you're obligated in respect to them, and you're between chapters. So therefore, you're allowed to initiate the relationship and say hello. But you're allowed to, you can't initiate with anyone, but to anyone who says hello to you, you can respond to them shalom, out of decency and out of proper respect. You can't initiate to another person, but you can respond. But you can initiate to a person who you give honor between the chapters. Now the Rambam continues to Tezayin. Haya, is there a question? No. Haya Karabam Parsha. What if you're in the middle of the chapter, not between them now? You're middle. Now you're not allowed to initiate hello to anybody who you have to give honor to anymore. Because now you're in the middle of interacting with Hashem in the middle of a chapter. But he says the only person you're allowed to initiate hello to is someone you're scared of. Kigon Melech, or Anas, a king or a tyrant. Somebody who you're worried that if you don't initiate hello, they can take it the wrong way and they can severely punish you or press you, etc. So that person, out of that scare or that fear, you're allowed to initiate hello even in the middle. But anybody else, he says, but now, but a person, like we said in the last halacha, somebody you have to obligated to give respect, your father, your teacher, if he initiates the relationship with you, they don't know you saying Shema. They walk over and say, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? You're allowed to respond, Aleichem Hashalom, but you're not allowed to initiate to them. So there are levels here. Between the chapters, I'm allowed to initiate to someone, I have to give honor, and I'm allowed to respond to anyone. In middle of the chapter, I'm only allowed to initiate to someone I'm scared of, a tyrant, but I'm allowed to respond to someone I'm allowed to give a cover to, but not just to any other person. And the Rambam will give us one more interesting halacha of explaining what is between the chapters. But just a comment, there's a lot of conversation that comes out of this in other conversations. Am I allowed to interrupt? I'm in the middle of davening and I'm behind the minyan and shul, and I'm saying Shema. Am I allowed to answer the Kiddusha or the Kaddish or the Baruch Hu? What if I get called up for an aliyah in the middle? The Gabbai doesn't know I'm in the middle of Shema, and he calls me up to be the Kohen, I get an aliyah, etc. There are a lot of detailed halachot that come out of whether you're between the chapters, the middle of the chapter, it's for Hashem, it's for a mitzvah, etc. And we're not going to go into all the details. The Rambam doesn't go into them right here. I'm just kind of putting out this concept might exist in more than today, where we just kind of don't say hello to people, or people understand if we don't always respond. But in 17, the final note, the final paragraph here, the Rambam says, what is considered between the chapters? We said between chapters is more lenient than the middle of the chapter. What does that mean? Between the first bracha and the second one. Between the second bracha and the Shema. In the morning we say 2 brachot. At night we also say 2 brachot before the Shema. So between the first and second bracha, between the second bracha and Shema, that's between chapters. Between Shema levahayim Shemoah. Between Shema, the first paragraph, which goes Shema and Vahafta, to Vahayim Shemoah, to the second chapter, which begins Vahayim Shemoah. Vahayim Shemoah levayomer. Between the chapter Vahaya to the chapter Vayomer, the third one. Ben aprakim ha'elu, between these stops that we said, Shalom im le'akavod, and Shalom l'chaladim, the Rambam reiterates you could initiate hello to anyone you have to give respect to, and you can respond hello, shalom, to anybody who comes over. And the Rambam concludes with a fascinating thing, which many of us realize because we say that in davening, Avo ben Vayomer le'emetz v'yatziv, between the third chapter Vayomer, the final one, and the next chapter, which continues the bracha after Shema, which starts Emet v'yatziv v'nachon, between those two, it's like in the middle of a chapter. V'lo yafsik, and you should not interrupt. Except you can initiate out of fear for the tyrant or respond out of honor to a father or teacher. But the word emet belongs with Ani Hashem Elokechem. It's the end of the Vayomer, and therefore we never interrupt and we always put them together, which is why you always hear people who shall say Ani Hashem Elokechem emet, and they always putting the emet together with the Vayomer. And with that, we have concluded chapter 2 of Rambam Hilchot Krishma. Any questions or comments? I'm open right now.